You're watching news at Prime, and thank you very much for that business update. Let's take you back now to one of our leading stories. President Cyril Ramaphosa saying he is awaiting a full report from South Africa's expelled ambassador to the United States, Ebrahim Rasool. This weekend, Rasool was given 72 hours to leave Washington, which lapses today. Now, to tell us more on when Rasool can be expected back home is the Department of International Relations and Cooperation spokesperson, but he keeps making the point that there is a ministry spokesperson and then he is the minister's spokesperson. Chrispin Phiri is with me in studio. Thank you very much for joining us, Chrispin. Let's start with the declaration of our ambassador as persona non grata. What does that mean for the ambassador, and is it safe for him to remain in that country until such time that they are ready to leave?
Yes, indeed. That's an important question, and I see you saying he has to be back tomorrow. I'm not sure when you're counting your 72 hours from, but I think it would be applicable as of Saturday. So he should still be in the country, but his immunities will lapse in 72 hours. So we would ensure that he's back as soon as possible before those immunities lapse. So if they has to stay from some other logistical reason, we would negotiate that he's back. But we are anticipating that he'll be back by the end of the week.
Yeah.
And by then, like the president has said, he will be debriefing the president as well as the minister on what has transpired and what then, from his recommendation, the work that he has done is the way forward. And I say that because Ambassador Rasool was on the verge of actually meeting very strategic officials in the White House. He had secured some significant appointments there. So this hurdle comes at that moment. So it will be important for him to debrief the president and the minister to say, how do we take the momentum that he may have achieved forward and how do we ensure that we sustain it? Just one last thing is that the PNG means that he, as an individual, will no longer be a welcome in the United States of America. So that's the effect of it. But it does not impact the relationship very directly. So we still have an embassy in Washington. It is fully represented by South Africans. The charge d'affaires will take over in the interim whilst we undertake the process of sending a new ambassador over to the United States.
The safety of the ambassador until such time that he lands in South Africa, is that something of concern to the ministry?
We would want him to get back as soon as possible, because once your immunities are up, then of course anything is possible. You are now treated as any other citizen. We wouldn't want that for our ambassador. We want him to come back. Not to say that there is a threat. I wouldn't want us to be alarmist to that extent, but we would want to ensure that we get him back as soon as possible.
Has Minister Ronald Lamola had a conversation with Ambassador Rasool? I'm talking now a telephonic discussion of sorts, and if so, what would have been the content and outcomes of that discussion?
Probably, as you could imagine, a matter of this nature, of course, the minister would have to get on the phone with his ambassadors and understand from their perspective what is the lay of the land, proverbially speaking. I'm not at liberty to reveal what that conversation entailed. But yes, Minister Lamola has been in contact with Ambassador Rasool, and yes, the conversation is that Ambassador Rasool is on his way back, and the debrief, the more substantive discussion would definitely take place on our shores.
The reason I ask this question, Chrispin, is it stems from whether South Africa stands by the comments that were made by the ambassador, and if not, how does DIRCO then address any misalignment between his personal remarks versus the country's foreign policy?
Look, if you look at that, this incident, we are talking about one particular comment in a segment of many other comments. So that's something that we have to look into with the ambassador to say, well, this is indeed on message. This is what we believe as the Republic. What could have happened here, and how did you see this message landing? Perhaps what audience were you speaking to? Dissecting this issue would have to take place in person. I wouldn't want us to get into that now. In fact, I can say that we are hoping to have a press conference probably next week, where we will then, after having debriefed Ambassador Rasool, we will then be able to take South Africans into confidence on a number of other things in the environment. But obviously this issue would also be one of the issues in the environment, where the minister will be able to enunciate a number of other things. But safe to say that there is a particular way in which the government communicates its views, and it would not be at a point or in a manner that is deemed to antagonize the host. And we also do believe that even if our American counterparts may have felt that this particular view antagonized them, they could have approached the issue differently through a démarche instead of a PNG. But they are entitled to take this approach in terms of Article 9 of the Vienna Convention, and we accept that.
Part of the discussion here, Chrispin, and you've already mentioned that you won't be able to get into the content of the discussions between the minister and Ambassador Rasool. But did the ambassador make these comments under the assumption that he perhaps was speaking to a limited audience and possibly thinking that he was taking that small community of people into his confidence about what his thoughts are in relation to the new administration in the United States? I'm trying to get into his mind and what then happens subsequently.
At the moment, that's unclear to me, and it's not clear to us either. I think that's not a topic that the minister traversed per se. You would recall that after the incident, what we do know is that the Secretary of State tweeted the matter, and then shortly afterwards, our ambassador was called into the State Department. So it was a question of more speaking about the events that had transpired at the State Department. But we wouldn't know as yet what the frame of mind was, or what the thinking behind that statement. What platform are you on? That's something that we don't want to second guess the ambassador on. Prefer to engage him on it in person.
You've already mentioned that the embassy continues to exist in Washington.
Yes.
It'll be manned by the staff that remains there. Are there immediate arrangements to replace Ambassador Rasool, or is that something that is still going to be under discussion?
The process has started to some extent, so that we can make a recommendation to the president internally, so the department will attend to the administrative issues. Once the person has been duly nominated, this person will be presented in name, of course, to the president, and the president will decide. But that would require us to follow the processes of the Foreign Services Act, which can take a life of their own, but that's why we've started in the interim all the administrative processes, so that whatever the other processes are with other sister departments are expedited.
Can I push a little bit more on that? So I don't want you to reveal any more than you have to, but it's safe to say that an individual has been identified, but that name has yet to be sent to the president for confirmation.
No, we don't want breaking news individual identified. The processes, internal processes of the department are underway. That's what I can say. But I'm not speaking to whether an individual or not has been identified. That's a separate issue. But the internal processes of the department are underway.
You'll understand that this has sparked renewed interest, public interest, that is, in the role of ambassadors. Are you able to walk us through the process of selecting ambassadorial candidates?
There are a number of considerations. One, you'd look at the relationship that you have with a particular country, what your interests are in that country, what the nation's interests are in that country, and what would then be the best fit for us to further those interests. In some countries, we would send a career diplomat because we would want a particular outcome. In some countries, you would send someone of a particular political stature. You could also send someone, an eminent South African, because you want to pursue a particular national interest in that country. So there are a number of considerations that are taken into account when you send an ambassador to another country. For example, in the past, we've sent someone like Ambassador Tony Leon to Argentina, or we've sent Ambassador Martinez van Schalkwyk a number of times to various other missions. We've sent, interesting individuals who would occupy a particular space in South Africa's body politic.
Yeah.
But we would then say, we would think that we can now trust you with this particular responsibility. And then you send them over to another country to further our relations. At the end of the day, an ambassador is always there to further our national interests and our agenda in that particular country, and build relations and solidify relations or maintain relations with that particular country.
I take note of the word trust, because that is important.
Absolutely, and it's the president who makes that decision. Because when you are in another country, you are as good as, you are the president's representative. You can take it as this is the president of the republic's word on this particular issue.
And the reason I'm edging towards that is that the kind of training or diplomatic preparation of ambassadors, what is it that they receive as some kind of training before they take up their posts? And is there particular guidance that is given on them making public statements and or nowadays the use of social media, because that clearly has proven to get some people into trouble?
Yes, really we're seeing public diplomacy is evolving, right? Before, decisions would get only mentioned through the diplomatic channel, and then maybe countries would release a statement about it. But now you're seeing the advent of Twitter, I think it's now called X rather, as a means of countries announcing or engaging in public diplomacy. The training that ambassadors receive, Koli, is quite comprehensive and very, 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 very rigorous. We do ensure that the ambassadors that we send abroad are well trained and they actually know what is expected of them. And we can say without a doubt, this is something that we do not miss a beat on.
Two quick questions before we end our conversation. So once Ambassador Rasool gets to South Africa, does he continue to get a salary? Is he even, does he continue to be referred as ambassador? How long, if indeed he does continue to get a salary, how long does he get a salary for?
I counted about 4 questions there. Well, quick one, once an ambassador, always an ambassador. Whether he would remain in the books of DIRCO and what the next administrative processes are is something that the political principals will decide. After, of course, having been debriefed by Ambassador Rasool and understanding the circumstances around this situation, I think it would require them to then assess how do we move forward with Ambassador Rasool. But as I understand it, the ambassadors have a contract with us, 4-year contract, but depending on what then transpires in a particular country and how that relationship may end is something that this administration would be seized with and then would have to advise moving forward.
Final question. Critics continue to criticize the government of President Cyril Ramaphosa on this diplomatic tension with the United States, that we have been too slow or it simply has been insufficient. How does DIRCO respond to the accusations that we've been too slow off the mark?
Look, like I say, Ambassador Rasool was on the verge of securing a very significant meeting in the White House. So clearly work was being done, and we need to give space to our representatives to do that work. And what we have also said repeatedly, Koli, is that if you look at how the U.S. administration functions, which is what we do at DIRCO, it's our job, the U.S. Africa desk is not yet in place. And that is important because those are the people who implement the day-to-day policy decisions in terms of how we relate from a bilateral level. The U.S. Trade Office has only received its nominee a couple of days ago. So that is also an important office holder if you look at issues like AGOA or what the future trade policy of the U.S. is. Because before you go to a country, you really need to understand how they're going to go about executing a particular policy. And that's the work that Ambassador Rasool had already done. And that's why his debrief is very critical. And So that critique may be misplaced, understanding what type of work we are busy with. We reassure the nation that this is a mutually beneficial relationship with the US, but we also stress that there must be mutual respect. And we will maintain our decorum at all times. I think the president said something like, we will not be blue-ticked.
Yeah.
And indeed, we will not be blue-ticked, but we're going to represent our country firmly, with authority, with facts, with all the evidence that is required of a nation like ours. And we are a great nation, Koli. We've got a lot to be proud of, and we've got a lot to present to all our partners across the world.
Chrispin Phiri, thank you very much for affording us your time this evening. Chrispin Phiri speaks for the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation.